Hi everyone and welcome to Fresh from My Garden. Today I'm sharing a very beautiful flowering plant from our garden. We purchased this plant a few months ago when we visited our hometown, and this plant is known as the bamboo orchid. So, as you can see, this flower is very beautiful and looks very similar to dendrobium orchids. I have purchased dendrobium orchids several times from nurseries and have tried growing them, but most of the time, after the blooming season is over, the plant dies back very fast, and I have failed to revive many of the orchids that I purchased. And orchids, as you know, are usually quite expensive, and they have certain care tips that we need to be aware of. So these are bamboo orchids and they are very low in maintenance. And as you can see, this is the plant. It looks like bamboo stalks, and they are very thin stalks that grow quite tall. And this is the first time I'm having three flowers together on this plant. So actually, it is more than one plant in this container, and they grow really tall and they have buds at the back of these flowers, which will continue to bloom and grow beautifully. So here you can see in this pot, you can see there are several plants growing from the base of the main plant. So these plants are grown from pseudobulbs, and these pseudobulbs are self-propagating, and you can see different sizes of plants. So this was purchased a few months back and it had two or three plants, but now there are more than three plants in this container. But this container is still good enough for these plants to self propagate and grow some more before we can repot or transplant some of them into another container. These bamboo orchids are a variety of ground orchid and are considerably low maintenance when we compare themselves to other dendrobium orchids. So they can be grown indoors as well as outdoors as long as you're growing them indoors in a bright, well lit spot. These plants are also tropical subtropical plants that love a lot of humidity. And here, as you can see, there are more buds growing behind this flower. So they bloom in succession. So once one bloom has withered and died back, then the next one blooms, and it constantly keeps blooming almost throughout the year. The potting soil for this plant, as suggested by the person at the nursery, is garden soil with some cocoa peat, cocoa chips, and vermicompost. So, we haven't repotted this plant after it has been purchased. It's been a few months since we purchased this plant, and it is not yet been repotted because, as you had seen in the container, there is still a lot of room for these plants to grow, and it is not yet root bound and it doesn't require to be repotted immediately. The pot size that it has been planted in or it is growing in is 12 to 14 inches, and that is enough, and it should do well in this pot for at least another year. To propagate this plant, we can separate these new plants that are coming from the pseudo bulbs. We can remove them carefully, detach them from the main plant, and transplant them into a different container or into the ground. We have placed our container in the northwest side of our garden, and it does get some partial sunlight and some evening sun. So it has been in this spot from the time we purchased and brought it home. So it hasn't been changed, the spot hasn't changed, and it is doing really well. And this is not the first time it is blooming. I had shared another video when it bloomed for the first time in our garden, and it was pretty exciting to see such a beautiful flower, an orchid flower, in bloom in spite of not giving it too much of care. So, if you love orchids or orchid variety of plants but cannot take care of one or have trouble with growing orchids just like I do, this is one plant which is a really low maintenance plant but with beautiful flowers that are also from the orchid variety, and they are so beautiful, and once they start blooming more, it should be a beautiful addition to any garden. So the main reason I purchased this plant is because of these beautiful flowers, and I love orchids, but I have never been able to keep an orchid alive for a very long time. They have always died back on me, and I have ended up discarding a lot of orchids. So, this is a plant that can bloom well and tolerate partial sunlight. It loves a lot of humidity, so make sure it doesn't dry out completely between waterings. Keep the plant a little moist and it will bloom well, and fertilize once every few weeks during the blooming season so that we can continue to get a lot of blooms. Any kind of dissolvable orchid fertilizer is ideal for this beautiful flowering plant. So, keeping these simple tips in mind, we can easily care for and grow this beautiful flower in the garden. So, I hope you enjoyed the care tips and a view of these beautiful flowers from our garden. Thanks for watching Fresh from My Garden.